The sound of hooves crunching through fresh snow woke Wesley Morrison at dawn, though it was the soft whimper that followed that made him abandon his coffee and step onto the porch of his ranch house in the bitter January cold of 1881. He squinted against the white landscape of his Wyoming property, searching for the source of the disturbance. The main house stood silent and sturdy, smoke curling from the chimney, but something felt wrong. Wesley pulled his coat tighter and walked toward the stables, his breath forming clouds in the frigid air. The sun had barely crested the horizon, painting the snow-covered range in shades of pink and gold, but Wesley barely noticed the beauty. 28 years on this earth had taught him to trust his instincts, and right now they were screaming that something was amiss. The stable door hung slightly ajar, which was odd since his ranch hand, Jake, always secured it tight against the winter winds. Wesley pushed it open slowly, his hand instinctively moving to the revolver at his hip. What he found inside made him freeze mid-step. Curled in the corner of an empty stall, buried under a thin layer of hay and what looked like a tattered blanket, was a woman. She was shivering violently, her lips tinged blue, and even in sleep she looked utterly exhausted. Her clothes were threadbare and travel-worn, clearly insufficient for the Wyoming winter. A small bundle sat beside her, and Wesley could see it contained nothing more than a few meager possessions. "Madam," Wesley called softly, not wanting to startle her. The woman jerked awake, her eyes flying open with pure terror. She scrambled backward into the corner, pulling the filthy blanket up as if it could protect her from whatever threat she perceived. Her eyes were a striking shade of green, made all the more vivid by the dark circles beneath them and the pallor of her skin. "Easy now," Wesley said, holding his hands up to show he meant no harm. "You are on my property, but I am not going to hurt you. How long have you been out here?" The woman stared at him, her whole body trembling from cold and fear. She looked to be in her early 20s, with auburn hair that had come loose from its pins and hung in tangled waves around her face. Even in her current state, Wesley could see she had delicate features and a certain grace about her. "I'm sorry," she finally managed through chattering teeth. "I'll leave. I just needed somewhere warm for the night. The barn door was open and I thought just for a few hours." "You will do no such thing," Wesley said firmly. "You are half frozen. When did you last eat?" The woman's eyes filled with tears, which she quickly blinked away. "I don't need charity." "It is not charity, it is human decency. I have a guest room in the house with a proper bed and a fireplace. You can warm up, get some food in you, and then we can talk about where you are headed and why you are sleeping in my stables in the middle of winter." She looked at him with suspicion and uncertainty warring in her expression. Wesley understood. A woman alone had every reason to be cautious around strange men, especially out here where law was more suggestion than rule. "I give you my word as a gentleman that you will be safe under my roof," Wesley added, his voice gentle but sincere. "My name is Wesley Morrison, and this is my ranch. I live alone except for my ranch hand Jake, who has quarters in the bunkhouse and a wife who keeps him honest. You are welcome to stay as long as you need." Something in his tone must have convinced her, because she slowly lowered the blanket and attempted to stand. Her legs gave out immediately, and Wesley lunged forward to catch her before she hit the ground. She was lighter than she should be, clearly malnourished, and she flinched at his touch even as she had no choice but to accept his support. "Easy does it," Wesley murmured. "When did you last have a proper meal?" "Few days," she admitted quietly. "Maybe more. I lost track." Wesley felt anger rise in his chest, not at her but at whatever circumstances had brought a young woman to this state. He carefully helped her to her feet, letting her lean against him as they made their slow way out of the stable. She grabbed her bundle with one hand, clutching it like it contained all the treasures in the world. The walk to the house was slow and difficult. The woman's legs were weak from cold and hunger, and she stumbled several times. Each time, Wesley steadied her with patience, murmuring encouragements. The snow crunched beneath their feet, and the wind had picked up, making the cold even more biting. When they finally reached the porch, Wesley pushed open the front door and guided her inside. The warmth of the house hit them immediately, and the woman made a small sound of relief. The main room was spacious and well-furnished, with a large fireplace currently burning with a healthy fire. Comfortable chairs sat arranged around it, and the whole space had a lived-in but well-maintained feel. "Guest room is this way," Wesley said, leading her down a hallway. He opened a door to reveal a cozy room with a large bed covered in quilts, a dresser, and its own fireplace. "I will get this fire going. You settle in." The woman stood in the doorway, looking overwhelmed. "I do not understand why you are being so kind." Wesley turned to look at her as he knelt by the fireplace, arranging kindling. "Because you need help, and I am in a position to give it." "It is as simple as that." "Nothing is ever that simple," she said quietly. "Maybe not," Wesley agreed, striking a match and coaxing the fire to life. "But sometimes it should be. Now, what is your name?" She hesitated, then said, Teresa Harper." "Well, Miss Harper, you make yourself comfortable. I am going to get you some warm water for washing and then prepare some breakfast. I imagine you could use both." "You don't have to do all that," Teresa protested weakly. "I know I do not have to," Wesley said, standing and brushing off his hands. "I want to. There is a difference." He paused at the door. "The clothes in that dresser belonged to my sister when she used to visit. She got married and moved to California about 3 years back. They might fit you well enough. Feel free to change into something warmer and cleaner." Before Teresa could respond, he was gone, closing the door gently behind him. She stood in the middle of the room, staring around her in disbelief. The bed looked impossibly soft and inviting after weeks of sleeping on the ground or in barns. The fire was already warming the space, driving away the chill that had settled deep in her bones. Moving slowly, Teresa opened the dresser and found it full of women's clothing. Dresses, skirts, blouses, nightgowns, all neatly folded and smelling faintly of lavender. Tears welled up in her eyes. She could not remember the last time someone had shown her such unconditional kindness. A knock on the door startled her. "Just leaving the water outside," Wesley's voice called. "Take your time." Teresa waited until she heard his footsteps retreat, then opened the door to find a large pitcher of warm water and a basin, along with clean towels and a bar of soap. She brought them inside and spent the next 20 minutes washing away weeks of grime and fear. The warm water felt like heaven, and she scrubbed until her skin was pink and clean. She chose a simple blue dress from the dresser, along with fresh undergarments. Everything fit reasonably well, though Wesley's sister had been slightly taller and fuller figured. Still, it was clean and warm, and Teresa felt more human than she had in months. She brushed her hair as best she could with her fingers, trying to work out the worst of the tangles. When she finally emerged from the room, following the smell of cooking food, she found Wesley in the kitchen. He had removed his coat and stood at the stove, expertly managing what looked like eggs, bacon, and potatoes. The kitchen was warm and welcoming, with morning light streaming through curtained windows. "You look better," Wesley observed, glancing up with a small smile. "The dress fits well enough." "Thank you," Teresa said softly, "for everything. I do not know how to repay you." "Sit down and eat," Wesley replied, gesturing to the table which he had already set with 2 plates. "We can worry about everything else later." Teresa sat, And moments later Wesley placed a plate in front of her piled high with food. The smell alone made her stomach clench with hunger. She tried to eat slowly, to have some dignity, but she was so desperately hungry that she found herself devouring the meal with single-minded focus. Wesley ate his own breakfast quietly, not commenting on her appetite. When she finally slowed down, looking slightly embarrassed, he simply asked, "More?" "I should not," Teresa said, though her eyes lingered on the pan still sitting on the stove. "Should not and do not want are different things," Wesley pointed out. "You are too thin, Miss Harper. Another helping will not hurt." This time Teresa ate more slowly, savoring each bite. As the immediate desperation of hunger faded, she became more aware of her surroundings and the man sitting across from her. Wesley Morrison was tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair that curled slightly at the ends and brown eyes that seemed kind despite the weathered roughness of his features. He had the look of a man who worked hard with his hands, but there was something gentle in his manner that put her at ease. "How long have you been traveling alone?" Wesley asked when she had finished. Teresa wrapped her hands around the cup of coffee he had poured for her. 6 weeks, maybe 7. "I left St. Louis in late November." Wesley's eyebrows rose. "You came all the way from Missouri. In winter." "I did not have much choice," Teresa said, staring into her cup. "I was working as a seamstress there, but the family I boarded with ran into financial troubles. They could not keep me on anymore. I had an aunt who supposedly settled somewhere in the Wyoming territory, but when I finally made it to the last town I had information for, nobody had heard of her." "So you have been wandering since then?" Teresa nodded. "I had some money saved, but it ran out faster than I expected. Stagecoach fare, food, lodging. And when people realize you are a woman alone with no protection or prospects, they charge you double or worse." Her voice carried bitter experience. "I've been doing odd jobs where I can, sewing mostly, but work is scarce in winter." "What is your plan now?" Wesley asked gently. "I do not know," Teresa admitted, and her voice cracked slightly. "I was trying to make it to the next town, but the snow came and I got turned around. I saw your property and thought if I could just rest in the barn for one night, get out of the wind, I would have the strength to keep going. I did not mean to trespass." "You are not trespassing now," Wesley said firmly. "You are a guest. And I think you should stay until you are properly recovered and we can figure out a real plan for your future. You cannot just wander around Wyoming in the dead of winter with no destination." Teresa looked up at him with eyes full of unshed tears. "Why would you do that for a stranger?" Wesley was quiet for a moment, considering his words. "My mother used to say that we are all just one bad turn away from needing help ourselves. She and my father built this ranch from nothing, and they taught my sister and me that if you have the means to help someone, you do it. No questions, no judgment." He met her eyes. "Besides, I could use some help around here. My ranch hand Jake is good with the cattle and horses, but his wife has been ill and he has been distracted. If you can sew, there are plenty of clothes that need mending, and the house could use a woman's touch in places I have been neglecting." "You would hire me?" Teresa asked, hope flickering in her voice. "Room and board plus a wage," Wesley confirmed. "Nothing fancy but honest work for honest pay. You stay in the guest room, help around the house and with mending, and in return you have a safe place to stay through the winter. Come spring, if you want to move on, you will have some money saved and can make proper plans. If you want to stay longer, we can discuss that when the time comes." Teresa felt tears spill down her cheeks. "I do not know what to say." "Say yes," Wesley suggested with a gentle smile. "Say you will stay and let yourself heal and rest. Everything else can wait." "Yes," Teresa whispered. "Yes, thank you. I will work hard, I promise." "I have no doubt," Wesley said, standing to clear the dishes. "For today, though, you should rest. You are exhausted and half frozen still. Get some more sleep in a proper bed. Tomorrow we can talk about work and wages and all the practical matters." Teresa wanted to protest, to insist she could start working immediately, but the truth was she felt utterly drained. The warmth, the food, and the sudden relief of having somewhere safe to stay had caught up with her all at once. "All right," she agreed quietly. She helped Wesley clean up the breakfast dishes despite his protests, then retreated to the guest room. The bed was as comfortable as it had looked, the quilts soft and warm. She climbed under them and was asleep almost before her head hit the pillow. When she woke, the light coming through the window suggested it was late afternoon. For a moment Teresa panicked, thinking she had overslept and wasted precious daylight, but then she remembered where she was and why. She was safe. She had somewhere to stay. The relief was so overwhelming that she had to take a few deep breaths to steady herself. Rising, she straightened the bed and tidied herself before venturing out into the house. She found Wesley in the main room, sitting by the fire and reading what looked like a cattle breeding manual. He looked up when she entered and set the book aside. "Feel better?" he asked. "Much," Teresa admitted. "I cannot remember the last time I slept that well." "Good. I figured you needed it." Wesley gestured to the chair across from him. "I have been thinking about the arrangement. If you are going to be staying here, we should probably discuss some ground rules." Teresa sat, folding her hands in her lap. "Of course. First, you have free run of the house. I do not expect you to hide in your room or ask permission to use the kitchen or anything like that. This is your home as long as you are here." Wesley's tone was matter of fact. "Second, I respect your privacy and I expect you to respect mine. I will not enter your room without knocking and receiving permission, and I would appreciate the same courtesy." "Absolutely," Teresa agreed quickly. "Third, if anything or anyone makes you uncomfortable, including me, you tell me immediately. You are safe here and I want you to feel safe." "Understood." Teresa felt a lump form in her throat at the genuine concern in his voice. "Understood. Good. Now, as for work, I was not lying when I said there is plenty of mending to be done. I also would not turn down help with cooking and general housekeeping, though I do not expect you to take on everything. I have been managing on my own for 2 years now, and I can keep doing my share." 2 years? Teresa asked before she could stop herself. "My parents died in a fire," Wesley said quietly. "Lamp got knocked over in town while they were visiting friends. My sister came back from California to help me sort everything out, but she had her own family to return to. I have been running the ranch solo since then, with Jake's help for the outdoor work." "I am so sorry," Teresa said softly. Wesley nodded, acknowledging her sympathy. "It was hard, but I have made my peace with it. They built something good here, and I intend to keep it going." He stood. "Come on, let me show you around properly. If you are going to be living here, you should know where everything is." He gave her a thorough tour of the house, pointing out the kitchen supplies, the pantry stocked with preserves and dry goods, the linen closet, and his own room at the opposite end of the hall from the guest room. The house was well built and clearly maintained with care, though Teresa could see evidence of bachelor living in the dust on some of the higher shelves and the haphazard organization in places. "The mending is in here," Wesley said, opening a closet to reveal several baskets overflowing with clothes in various states of disrepair. "I am afraid I have been letting it pile up. I can manage basic repairs, but anything more complicated than sewing on a button is beyond me." Teresa smiled slightly, the first real smile Wesley had seen from her. "I can handle this. It will take some time to get through it all, but I can do it." "No rush," Wesley assured her. Like I said, it has been piling up for a while. A few more weeks will not make a difference." They continued the tour outside, Wesley lending her one of his coats since hers was practically useless against the cold. He showed her the smokehouse, the chicken coop, the vegetable garden currently dormant under snow, and finally the stables where he had found her that morning. "We have 6 horses currently," Wesley explained as they walked down the line of stalls. 4 for ranch work, 1 for pulling the wagon, and 1 that was my mother's. I cannot bring myself to sell her." He stopped at a stall containing a beautiful chestnut mare who nickered softly at their approach. "This is Ginger. She is getting old now, but she is gentle as a lamb." Teresa reached out tentatively to stroke the mare's nose. Ginger leaned into the touch, and Teresa felt something in her chest loosen. "She is beautiful." "She is yours to ride if you want," Wesley offered. "Assuming you know how to ride." "I do," Teresa confirmed. "My father taught me when I was young before he passed. It has been years, though." "It will come back to you," Wesley said. "Ginger will take care of you. She is basically retired now, so she would probably enjoy the exercise." They finished the tour as the sun was setting, painting the snow-covered landscape in brilliant oranges and reds. Teresa found herself relaxing in Wesley's presence. He was easy to talk to, never prying but always willing to listen if she offered information. He pointed out landmarks on his property, explaining the boundaries of the ranch and how he managed the cattle that he assured her were out there somewhere, finding shelter in the valleys and trees. "In spring, this place transforms," Wesley said as they walked back to the house. "Everything turns green, the cattle come back up from the lowlands, and we start the real work of running a ranch. For now, though, winter is a time for maintenance and rest." That evening, Teresa insisted on cooking dinner. She found the kitchen well stocked and managed to put together a hearty stew with vegetables from the root cellar and beef from the cold storage. Wesley praised the meal enthusiastically, saying it was the best thing he had eaten in months. "You do not have to flatter me," Teresa said, though she looked pleased. "I am not flattering, I am being honest," Wesley insisted. "I can cook enough to keep myself alive, but it is all pretty basic. This actually has flavor and everything." They fell into an easy conversation over dinner, carefully avoiding the heavier topics of their pasts in favor of lighter subjects. Wesley told her about the ranch, about his plans for spring, about the small community of neighboring ranchers who looked out for each other in this isolated part of Wyoming. Teresa found herself talking about her love of sewing, how she had always dreamed of having her own shop someday, and the satisfaction she found in creating something beautiful and useful with her hands. The days began to fall into a comfortable rhythm. Teresa would wake early before the sun and start coffee and breakfast. Wesley would come in from checking the animals, and they would eat together, making easy conversation or comfortable silence depending on the mood. Then Wesley would head out to work on various ranch tasks, while Teresa tackled the household chores and the mountain of mending. She discovered quickly that she enjoyed the work. There was something satisfying about bringing order to the house, about seeing the pile of mending slowly diminish as she worked her way through it. Wesley had not been exaggerating when he said the house needed a woman's touch. There were cobwebs in corners, windows that had not been properly cleaned in months, and all manner of small disorder that came from a man living alone. But Teresa did not mind. In fact, she found it therapeutic. Each task completed was a small victory, a piece of evidence that she was useful and needed. After weeks of feeling helpless and adrift, the simple act of scrubbing a floor or mending a shirt gave her a sense of purpose she had been desperately missing. Wesley, for his part, was unfailingly kind and respectful. He thanked her for every meal, complimented her work without being patronizing, and never made her feel like a burden. He kept his distance, careful not to crowd her or make her uncomfortable, but he was always ready with a smile or a kind word when their paths crossed. A week after Teresa's arrival, a snowstorm rolled in that kept them both inside for 3 days. Teresa worried at first that being confined to the house together would be awkward, but instead she found it surprisingly pleasant. They spent the time in the main room, Teresa sewing by the fire while Wesley caught up on bookkeeping and read. Sometimes they talked, sharing stories from their pasts. Wesley told her about growing up on the ranch, about his sister Rebecca, who he clearly adored despite the distance between them, about the challenges and rewards of ranch life. Teresa, slowly letting her guard down, shared more about her own history. Her parents had both died when she was 17, leaving her alone. She had managed to find work as a seamstress and had been doing well enough in St. Louis until circumstances beyond her control had left her jobless and homeless. She spoke matter-of-factly about the hardships she had faced, but Wesley could hear the pain beneath her words. "You are stronger than you think," he told her one evening as they sat by the fire, the storm howling outside. "To survive what you have been through, to keep going when most people would have given up, that takes real courage." Teresa looked up from her sewing, surprised. "I do not feel courageous. Most of the time I just feel scared and tired." "Courage is not the absence of fear," Wesley said quietly. "It is doing what needs to be done despite the fear. You have been doing that every day." Their eyes met across the firelight and something passed between them, something unspoken but profound. Teresa felt her heart skip in her chest. She looked away quickly, focusing intently on her sewing, but she could feel a warmth spreading through her that had nothing to do with the fire. Wesley felt it too, though he tried to ignore it. He had noticed, of course, that Teresa was beautiful. He would have had to be blind not to. But it was more than that. She was kind and hardworking, with a quiet strength that he found himself admiring more each day. The way she hummed while she worked, the careful attention she paid to even the smallest tasks, the genuine smile that was appearing more frequently as she settled in, all of it drew him in. But he also knew she had been through trauma and hardship. The last thing she needed was her employer making unwanted advances. So Wesley kept his growing feelings to himself, determined to be nothing but a gentleman and a friend. After the storm passed, Wesley suggested Teresa might like to try riding Ginger. She agreed eagerly, and he saddled the mare while Teresa bundled up in warm clothes. As predicted, riding came back to her quickly. She and Wesley rode out across the snow-covered property, Ginger moving at a gentle pace while Wesley rode beside her on his own horse, a sturdy gelding named Duke. The landscape was breathtaking, endless white broken only by the dark lines of fence posts and the occasional stand of trees. The sky was a brilliant blue, and their breath and the horse's breath formed clouds in the cold air. Teresa felt a sense of freedom she had not experienced in months, maybe years. "It is so beautiful here," she said, unable to keep the wonder from her voice. "It is," Wesley agreed, though he was looking at her rather than the landscape. He caught himself and quickly looked away. "I never get tired of it. Every season has its own kind of beauty." They rode for about an hour before returning to the ranch. Wesley helped Teresa down from the saddle, his hand steadying her at the waist. For a moment they stood close, and Wesley could smell the faint scent of the lavender soap she used. He stepped back quickly, perhaps too quickly, and focused on unsaddling the horses. Teresa felt the loss of his touch like a physical thing. She told herself she was being foolish, reading too much into simple kindness, but her heart was not listening to her head. As January turned into February, The weather remained bitterly cold, but inside the ranch house, things were warming up in more ways than one. Teresa and Wesley spent more time together, their conversations growing longer and more personal. Teresa found herself looking forward to mealtimes and evenings by the fire, to the sound of Wesley's voice and his occasional laugh. Wesley, meanwhile, was fighting a losing battle with his own feelings. He caught himself watching Teresa as she worked, admiring the graceful movements of her hands as she sewed, the way firelight caught in her auburn hair, the sound of her humming. He found excuses to be in the house more often, helping with tasks that did not really need his help just to be near her. One evening in mid-February, Teresa was struggling to reach a high shelf in the kitchen, trying to return a serving platter. Wesley came up behind her, reaching easily over her head to place the platter on the shelf. Teresa turned, and suddenly they were standing very close, her back against the counter, Wesley's arm still extended above her. "Thank you," Teresa said softly, her voice slightly breathless. "You are welcome," Wesley replied, not moving away. His eyes searched her face, looking for any sign of discomfort or fear. What he saw instead was her pupils dilating, her lips parting slightly, her breathing quickening. He should step back. He knew he should step back. But instead he found himself leaning closer, giving her every opportunity to pull away or protest. She did neither. Instead, she tilted her face up toward his, her eyes fluttering closed. The kiss was soft and tentative at first, barely more than a brush of lips. But when Teresa's hand came up to rest on Wesley's chest, when she made a small sound of encouragement, he deepened the kiss, his hand moving to cup her face gently. She tasted like the apple pie they had eaten for dessert, sweet and warm, and Wesley felt like he was drowning in the best possible way. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Wesley rested his forehead against hers. "I am sorry," he said quietly. "I should not have done that without asking." "I wanted you to," Teresa admitted, her cheeks flushed. "I have wanted you to for weeks." Wesley pulled back enough to look at her properly. "Teresa, I need you to understand something. You are not obligated to me in any way. You work for me, yes, but that does not mean you owe me anything beyond the work we agreed on. If you do not want this, if I have misread things, please tell me and we will forget it ever happened." Teresa met his eyes steadily. "You have not misread anything, Wesley. I care for you. More than I probably should, given the circumstances, but I cannot seem to help it. You have been so kind to me, and somewhere along the way I started to fall for you. I have been falling for you since the day I found you in my stable," Wesley confessed. "Maybe that makes me crazy, but it is the truth. You are brave and strong and beautiful, and I think about you constantly." They stood in the kitchen, holding each other and grinning like fools. Finally, Teresa laughed. "So what do we do now? I suppose we see where this goes," Wesley said. "If you are willing to take a chance on a rancher who spends half his time smelling like cattle and has no prospects beyond this little piece of Wyoming." "I think I can manage that," Teresa said, smiling. "As long as you are willing to take a chance on a wandering seamstress with no family and a questionable past." "There is nothing questionable about your past," Wesley said firmly. "You survived. You persevered. That is admirable, not questionable." He kissed her again, soft and sweet. "And as for family, you have one now. You have me, and Jake and his wife, and all the neighbors who will be thrilled to hear the bachelor Morrison finally found someone." Teresa felt tears prick her eyes, but they were happy tears this time. "I have not had a family in so long." "You do now," Wesley assured her, pulling her into a tight embrace. "For as long as you want it." From that night on, their relationship deepened and grew. They were careful around Jake, who came to the main house occasionally for meetings with Wesley about ranch business, but Wesley told his ranch hand the truth soon enough. Jake, a weathered man in his 50s with a kind face, was delighted. "About time you found someone," he told Wesley with a grin. "This ranch has been too quiet without a woman's laughter. My wife will be over the moon when I tell her." True to his word, Jake's wife Margaret came to visit as soon as she was feeling well enough. She was a plump, cheerful woman who took to Teresa immediately, pulling her into a hug and declaring her a perfect match for Wesley. "I have been telling him for years he needs to settle down," Margaret said, settling into a chair by the fire with a cup of tea. "A man needs a wife and a family, not just cattle and horses." Teresa blushed but smiled. "We are just seeing how things go." "Oh, I know how things will go," Margaret said with a knowing look. "I saw how he looks at you, dear. That boy is head over heels." Wesley, overhearing this from the kitchen, called out, "I am standing right here, Margaret." "I know, dear." "I am counting on you to hear me," Margaret replied without missing a beat, making Teresa laugh. February gave way to March, and the weather began to slowly warm. The snow started to melt, revealing the brown earth beneath, and the first hints of green pushing through. Wesley began preparing for the spring work, and Teresa helped where she could. Her strength fully returned now after weeks of good food and rest. Their relationship continued to blossom. Wesley was attentive without being overbearing, affectionate without pushing for more than Teresa was ready to give. They spent evenings by the fire, talking and dreaming about the future. Wesley spoke of his plans for the ranch, of wanting to expand the herd and improve the breeding stock. Teresa talked about her sewing, about maybe taking on commission work from some of the neighboring ranches. "You could do that from here," Wesley pointed out one evening as they sat close together on the sofa, his arm around her shoulders. "Set up a proper sewing room and take commissions. Build a reputation. Eventually you could have that shop you dreamed about." "I could not do that and still help you around the ranch," Teresa protested. "We could hire help," Wesley said. "Not to replace you, but to free you up to pursue what you love. I have the means, Teresa. The ranch does well. I could afford to bring on someone to help with the house so you can focus on your sewing if that is what you want." Teresa turned to look at him. "You would do that for me." "I would do anything for you," Wesley said simply. "I love you, Teresa." "I know it is fast, and maybe I should wait longer to say it, but it is the truth. I love you and I want you to be happy and fulfilled, whatever that looks like." Teresa felt her heart swell. "I love you too," she whispered. "I tried not to. I told myself it was too soon, that I was just grateful for your help, but it is more than that. So much more. You make me happy, Wesley. Just being with you makes me happy." Wesley kissed her deeply, and for a long while words were unnecessary. As spring truly arrived, the ranch transformed just as Wesley had promised. Green grass pushed up through the melting snow, flowers bloomed, and the cattle began returning from their winter grazing areas in the valleys. The workload increased dramatically, and Wesley was often out from dawn to dusk, working with Jake to manage the herd and tend to the endless tasks that came with spring on a ranch. Teresa missed him during the long days, but she kept herself busy. She had finished all the mending and had indeed begun taking on commission work from neighbors. Word had spread that there was a talented seamstress at the Morrison ranch, and people began bringing her projects. She mended, altered, and even created new garments, and her reputation grew. Wesley set up a sewing room for her in one of the unused bedrooms, installing good light and a proper work table. Teresa was touched by his thoughtfulness and the care he took to make sure she had everything she needed. In early April, Wesley came in from the fields one evening and found Teresa cooking dinner, humming a song he did not recognize. He watched her from the doorway for a moment, his heart full. Then he walked up behind her, wrapped his arms around her waist, and kissed the top of her head. "Marry me," he said. Teresa went very still. "What?" Wesley turned her to face him, taking her hands in his. "Marry me, Teresa. I know we have not been courting long by conventional standards, but I am sure. I have never been more sure of anything in my life. You are my partner, my best friend, the person I want to wake up next to every morning for the rest of my life. Say you will marry me." Teresa's eyes filled with tears. "Are you certain? I have nothing to bring to a marriage, no dowry, no family connections, no property." "You bring yourself," Wesley said firmly. "That is all I want and all I need. You are kind and strong and brilliant, and you make this house a home. You make me better just by being here. So yes, I am certain. The question is, are you?" "Yes," Teresa said, laughing through her tears. "Yes, I will marry you." Wesley whooped and lifted her off her feet, spinning her around the kitchen while she laughed and protested that dinner was burning. He set her down long enough to move the pan off the heat, then pulled her close again, kissing her thoroughly. They were married in late May in a simple ceremony at the small church in the nearest town, which was about a day's ride away. Margaret helped Teresa make her wedding dress, a beautiful creation in cream-colored silk that Teresa had splurged on with her sewing money. Wesley wore his best suit, and he could not take his eyes off his bride as she walked down the aisle. Jake and Margaret served as witnesses, along with several neighbors who had befriended Teresa over the past months. It was a small gathering, but full of warmth and genuine happiness. The pastor, an elderly man who had known Wesley since birth, gave a lovely sermon about love and partnership, about building a life together through good times and hardships. When Wesley kissed his bride, sealing their vows, Teresa felt like her heart might burst from happiness. This man, this wonderful man, had saved her life in more ways than one. He had given her not just shelter but a home, not just security but love, not just a future but hope. The wedding dinner was held at the ranch, with tables set up outside to take advantage of the beautiful spring weather. Margaret had helped Teresa prepare an enormous feast, and the neighbors had brought dishes as well. There was music and dancing, laughter and toasts, and as the sun set, Teresa found herself in Wesley's arms, swaying to a fiddle tune under the stars. "Happy," Wesley murmured against her ear. "More than I ever thought possible," Teresa replied honestly. 6 months ago I was alone and scared and sleeping in a barn. Now I am married to the man I love with a home and friends and a future. It feels like a dream." "It is not a dream," Wesley assured her. "It is real, and it is ours, and we get to keep building it together." That night, in the privacy of their bedroom, Wesley was gentle and patient, making sure Teresa felt safe and loved. They came together with tenderness and passion, cementing their union in the most intimate way. Afterward, lying in Wesley's arms, Teresa felt a peace she had never known. Life as a married couple suited them both. They fell into new rhythms, learning to navigate the challenges of sharing space and making decisions together. There were adjustments, of course, small conflicts about how to arrange the kitchen or how much time Wesley should spend working, but they talked through everything with honesty and respect. Teresa's sewing business continued to grow. She became known throughout the area as a skilled seamstress and designer. Women would travel from neighboring ranches and even from town to commission dresses for special occasions. Teresa saved most of her earnings, dreaming of eventually opening a proper shop, though she was in no rush. She loved her life on the ranch with Wesley. Wesley, meanwhile, was thriving in ways he had not since before his parents died. Having Teresa as his partner gave him new energy and purpose. They made decisions about the ranch together, Teresa offering perspectives he had never considered. She had a good head for numbers and helped him organize his bookkeeping in ways that made it much easier to track expenses and profits. In September, Teresa realized she had missed her monthly courses. She waited another month to be sure, then told Wesley the news. She had worried he might not be ready for children, but his reaction was pure joy. He picked her up and spun her around, much like he had when she accepted his proposal, then set her down carefully as if she were made of glass. "I am not broken," Teresa laughed. "Women have babies all the time." "I know, but you are carrying our baby," Wesley said, kneeling down and placing his hands gently on her still flat stomach. "Our child. That is a miracle." Margaret, who had experience with babies, became Teresa's unofficial advisor and support system. She taught Teresa what to expect, helped her prepare baby clothes, and assured her that everything she was feeling was normal. Wesley was attentive to the point of being overprotective, which Teresa found both endearing and occasionally frustrating. "I am pregnant, not an invalid," she reminded him when he tried to prevent her from carrying anything heavier than a teacup. "I know, but I worry," Wesley admitted. "What if something happens to you or the baby? We will be fine," Teresa assured him, though she was touched by his concern. "Women have been having babies since the beginning of time. My mother had me and Margaret had 3 children. I am healthy and strong. We will be all right." As winter came again, Teresa's belly grew round with their child. She continued her sewing work, though she had to adjust some of her techniques as her size changed. Wesley spent more time in the house, wanting to be near her. They would sit by the fire in the evenings, Wesley talking to Teresa's belly and feeling for kicks while Teresa knitted tiny sweaters and booties. In late March of 1882, just over a year after they had met, Teresa went into labor. Margaret came to the house and sent Wesley and Jake out to work on some project in the barn, saying she would call them when it was time. The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Margaret looked worried, but Teresa was strong and determined. Finally, as the sun was setting, the sound of a baby's cry filled the house. Margaret cleaned up the infant and wrapped it in blankets, then handed the bundle to Teresa with a broad smile. "You have a son," she announced. Teresa looked down at her baby, at his perfect tiny features and the shock of dark hair on his head, and felt overwhelming love. Wesley burst into the room moments later, having heard the cry, and froze at the sight of his wife holding their child. "Come meet your son," Teresa said softly. Wesley approached slowly, almost reverently. He sat on the edge of the bed and looked down at the baby, his eyes wet with tears. "He is perfect," he whispered. "Absolutely perfect." "What should we name him?" Teresa asked. They had discussed names but never settled on anything definite. Wesley thought for a moment, then said, "What about William, after my father? We can call him Will." Teresa smiled. "William Morrison, I like that. Hello, Will. Welcome to the world." Will Morrison proved to be a healthy, happy baby with a strong set of lungs. The first few months were exhausting as Teresa and Wesley adjusted to parenthood, but they managed with Margaret's help and support. Wesley was a devoted father, taking over baby care whenever he could to give Teresa a break, and he would often be found walking the floor at night with Will tucked against his shoulder, singing soft lullabies his mother had sung to him. As Will grew, the ranch prospered. Wesley's hard work and smart management paid off, and they were able to hire a ranch hand to help Jake with the outdoor work. This freed up more of Wesley's time to spend with his family, which he appreciated enormously. Teresa, meanwhile, made the decision to scale back her sewing business. She still took on occasional commissions for special pieces, but she found she wanted to spend more time with Will and Wesley. The money was not as necessary now that the ranch was doing well, and her family was her priority. When Will was 2 years old, Teresa discovered she was pregnant again. This time the pregnancy was easier, and in the spring of 1884, she gave birth to a daughter they named Ruth, after Wesley's mother. Ruth had her mother's auburn hair and green eyes, and she was adored by everyone, especially her big brother Will, who took his role as protector very seriously, despite being just a toddler himself. The years passed in a blur of happiness and hard work. Will and Ruth grew into lively, healthy children. Wesley expanded the ranch gradually, always careful not to overextend but building a solid, prosperous operation. Teresa's sewing evolved from business to hobby, creating beautiful clothes for her children and occasionally for herself. They faced challenges, of course. There were hard winters and dry summers, sick cattle and broken equipment, the endless small crises that came with ranching. But they faced everything together, as partners in every sense of the word. When Will was 7 and Ruth was 5, Wesley and Teresa sat on the porch one evening, watching their children play in the yard. Will was teaching Ruth how to throw a ball, his patience with his little sister touching to witness. "You ever think about that night I found you in the stable?" Wesley asked, his arm around Teresa's shoulders. "Sometimes," Teresa admitted. "It feels like a lifetime ago, like it happened to someone else. You were so scared and so brave at the same time," Wesley remembered. "I knew right then that you were someone special. I just did not know how special." Teresa leaned her head against his shoulder. "You saved my life that night. I was at the end of my rope. I do not know what would have happened if you had not found me." "I do not want to think about that," Wesley said, tightening his hold on her. "I am just grateful I did find you. You and the kids are everything to me. This ranch, this life we have built, it is more than I ever dreamed possible." "For me too," Teresa said softly. "I had given up on dreams when you found me. I was just trying to survive. You gave me back my ability to hope, to dream, to love. You gave me everything." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the children play as the sun set behind the mountains. The Wyoming landscape spread out before them, their land, their home. Will came running up to the porch, Ruth trailing behind him. "Mama, can we have cookies before bed?" Teresa laughed. "If you wash up first and promise to brush your teeth after." The children raced inside and Teresa rose to follow them. Wesley caught her hand and pulled her back for a quick kiss. "I love you, Mrs. Morrison." "I love you too, Mr. Morrison," Teresa replied with a smile. Inside the house, there was the sound of children laughing and water running as they washed up. Teresa went to get the cookie jar while Wesley supervised the cleanup. These were the moments Teresa treasured most, the simple everyday moments of family life. That night, after the children were tucked into bed and the house was quiet, Wesley and Teresa retired to their own room. They lay in bed talking quietly about plans for the coming season, about Will starting school in the fall, about Ruth's endless questions about everything. "We should think about building an addition," Wesley suggested. "The kids are getting bigger. They will need more space eventually. Maybe separate rooms instead of sharing." "That sounds wonderful," Teresa agreed. "And maybe we could finally build that workshop you have been talking about for your woodworking. And a proper sewing room for you with better light," Wesley added. "You deserve a real studio space if you decide to take on more work again." They dreamed and planned until sleep claimed them, wrapped in each other's arms. Years continued to roll by. Will grew into a responsible young man who loved ranch work and showed every sign of wanting to follow in his father's footsteps. Ruth was creative and spirited, showing an interest in her mother's sewing and also in the books that Teresa made sure were always available. When Will was 12 and Ruth was 10, Teresa and Wesley surprised their children with news of another baby on the way. The children were thrilled at the prospect of a new sibling. This pregnancy was harder on Teresa, now in her late 30s, but she remained healthy and strong throughout. In the winter of 1891, Teresa gave birth to another son, whom they named Thomas after Teresa's father. The baby was welcomed with great joy by his older siblings, who doted on him constantly. Will was old enough to be a real help with the baby, and Ruth loved playing little mother. Wesley, now 44, found fatherhood just as rewarding the third time around as he had the first. He would often be found sitting by the fire in the evening with baby Thomas on his lap, telling stories while Will and Ruth listened raptly. The ranch had grown into one of the most successful operations in the region. Wesley had a reputation as a fair employer and a smart rancher, and people came from far and wide seeking his advice. He always gave it freely, remembering how isolated he had felt when he first took over the ranch after his parents' death. Teresa had become a pillar of the small community. She organized church socials, taught other women sewing skills, and was known for her generosity and kindness. People remembered that she had come from nothing and had built a good life through hard work and determination, and they respected her for it. One spring day, when Thomas was 3 years old, a young woman showed up at the ranch, travel-worn and clearly at the end of her resources. She was looking for work and had heard the Morrisons sometimes hired help. Wesley and Teresa exchanged glances, both thinking of that winter night so long ago when Wesley had found Teresa in the stable. Without hesitation, Teresa invited the young woman in for a meal and a chance to rest. They ended up hiring her to help with the house and the children, giving her a safe place to stay and honest work. "You have a good heart," Wesley told Teresa that night. "I remember what it is like to be desperate and alone," Teresa replied. "If we can help someone else the way you helped me, we should." The young woman, whose name was Sarah, stayed with them for 2 years before meeting and marrying a neighboring rancher's son. She remained a close friend of the family, often saying that the Morrisons had saved her life just as they had saved each other. As Will approached adulthood, he made it clear he wanted to stay on the ranch and eventually take it over. Wesley could not have been more pleased. Together, father and son began making plans for the future, talking about expansions and improvements that would carry the ranch into the new century. Ruth, at 16, had become an accomplished seamstress under her mother's tutelage. She talked about maybe opening a dress shop in the nearest town, and Teresa and Wesley encouraged her dreams while making sure she understood the realities of running a business. Thomas, at 8, was still figuring out his interests, but he loved books and learning, showing an academic inclination that neither of his siblings had displayed. Wesley and Teresa made sure he had access to education, even hiring a tutor to supplement what he could learn at the small local school. On Teresa and Wesley's 20th wedding anniversary in 1896, their children threw them a surprise party. Friends and neighbors from all over the region came to celebrate with them. There was food and music and dancing, and at one point someone called for Wesley to make a speech. He stood, somewhat embarrassed by the attention, and pulled Teresa up to stand beside him. "I am not much for speeches," he began, "but I will say this. 20 years ago, I gave this woman a place to sleep and something to eat because it was the right thing to do. I had no idea that simple act of decency would lead to the greatest blessing of my life. Teresa, you have made me happier than I ever thought possible. You have given me children I adore, a home full of love and laughter, and a partnership that sustains me every day. I love you more now than I did the day we married, and I will love you more tomorrow than I do today." There was not a dry eye in the house. Teresa kissed her husband while everyone cheered. Then she turned to address the gathered crowd herself. Wesley tells the story like he was the hero who rescued me, she said, her voice strong and clear. And in many ways he did. But what he does not say is that I rescued him too. He was alone, grieving, carrying burdens he did not have to carry by himself. We saved each other. That is what love is. It is not one person rescuing another. It is two people choosing to face life together, lifting each other up when one stumbles, celebrating each other's victories, and building something beautiful together. I am grateful every day for that cold night when I stumbled onto this ranch. It brought me home. The party continued late into the night, full of joy and celebration. When everyone had finally left and the house was quiet, Wesley and Teresa walked outside to sit on the porch swing they had installed years ago. The stars were brilliant overhead, and the night was peaceful. 20 years, Wesley mused. It has gone so fast. And yet I can barely remember life before you, Teresa said. It is like my real life started that morning when I woke up in your stable and found you standing there. Our real lives started then, Wesley corrected. Both of us. They sat in comfortable silence, swaying gently on the swing. In the distance, they could hear the cattle lowing and the horses moving in the stable, the sounds of the ranch that had become the soundtrack of their lives. You think we have done all right? Teresa asked. With the children, with the ranch, with everything? I think we have done better than all right, Wesley said firmly. Look at our children. Will is responsible and hardworking. Ruth is talented and confident. Thomas is bright and curious. They are good kids who will grow into good adults. The ranch is prosperous and will provide for generations. We have friends, a community, a good life. What more could we ask for? Nothing, Teresa agreed. Absolutely nothing. I have everything I could ever want right here. As they grew older, Wesley and Teresa watched with pride as their children pursued their own dreams. Will married a lovely young woman from a neighboring ranch and brought her home to the Morrison Ranch. He and Wesley worked side by side, with Will gradually taking on more responsibility for running the operation. Ruth did open her dress shop in town, and it became quite successful. She married a banker who supported her ambitions, and they had 3 daughters whom Teresa and Wesley adored. Thomas went to college, a rare achievement for someone from their area, and became a teacher. He returned to Wyoming after his education and taught at a school in a larger town, visiting the ranch frequently, and always speaking of his parents with deep love and respect. Wesley and Teresa became grandparents many times over, and their home was often filled with visiting children and grandchildren. They loved these visits, though they also enjoyed the quiet times when it was just the two of them again. In their later years, they would often sit on that same porch swing, holding hands and watching the sunset over the mountains. Wesley's hair had gone completely gray, and his hands were gnarled from years of hard work, but he was still strong and vital. Teresa had laugh lines around her eyes and her auburn hair had streaks of silver, but she was still beautiful in Wesley's eyes. You remember that first morning? Wesley asked one evening, a question he had asked many times over the years. Every detail, Teresa replied, as she always did. You standing in the stable doorway with the sunrise behind you. I thought you might be an angel come to take me to heaven, Wesley chuckled. I am many things, but an angel is not one of them. You were my angel, Teresa insisted. You gave me everything. A home, a family, love, purpose. You gave me my life back. And you gave me mine, Wesley said, raising her hand to his lips and kissing it gently. Best decision I ever made bringing you into my house. Best decision I ever made was staying, Teresa agreed. They sat together as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink and purple. The ranch spread out before them, the land they had worked and loved and built a life on. Inside the house, they could hear Will and his wife getting dinner ready, the sounds of family and home. "I love you, Teresa Morrison," Wesley said, as he had said countless times over the years. "I love you, Wesley Morrison," Teresa replied, as she always would. And as the stars began to appear in the darkening sky above Wyoming, two people who had found each other when both were lost sat together in perfect contentment, grateful for every moment of the life they had built together. The rancher who had opened his home and his heart, and the woman who had been sleeping in his stable, had found in each other not just love but a completeness that would last for all their days. Years later, when their children and grandchildren gathered to celebrate their golden wedding anniversary, the story was told again of how Wesley and Teresa had met. The younger generation never tired of hearing it, of the romance and providence that had brought their grandparents together. Wesley and Teresa, now both in their 70s, sat surrounded by the fruits of their love. 3 children, numerous grandchildren, and even a few great-grandchildren filled their home with noise and laughter. The ranch had passed primarily to Will's management, though Wesley still offered advice and helped where he could. Teresa had long since retired from regular sewing, though she occasionally made special pieces for family. As the celebration wound down and families began to depart, promising to visit again soon, Wesley and Teresa found themselves alone once more. They moved slower now, their bodies bearing the marks of age and hard work, but their love had only deepened with time. That night, lying in bed together as they had for 50 years, Teresa turned to Wesley with a soft smile. "We have had a good life, have we not?" "The best," Wesley agreed, pulling her close. "The very best." "I am grateful for every moment," Teresa said. "Even the hard times, because we faced them together." "Together," Wesley echoed. "That has always been our strength." They drifted off to sleep in each other's arms just as they had done for half a century. Outside, the Wyoming wind whispered through the trees, and the ranch settled into the quiet of night. Inside, 2 hearts beat in rhythm, 2 souls intertwined, 2 lives that had become one through love and commitment and the simple act of kindness that had started it all. The years continued to pass, and eventually, as is the way of all things, Wesley and Teresa passed on, though not before living long enough to see their great-grandchildren growing strong and healthy. They died within months of each other, Teresa going first peacefully in her sleep, and Wesley following not long after, his heart simply giving out from the grief of living without his beloved. They were buried side by side on a hill overlooking the ranch they had built together. Their children and grandchildren mourned them deeply, but also celebrated the incredible legacy they had left behind. Not just the ranch, which continued to prosper under Will's management, but the example they had set of what love and partnership could be. At the funeral, Will spoke of his parents with tears streaming down his face. "My father found my mother sleeping in a stable," he said. "He gave her the guest room and his heart, and she gave him hers in return. They built a life together that has blessed all of us. They showed us what it means to love faithfully, to work hard, to treat others with kindness and dignity. They taught us that where you start does not matter as much as where you are going, and that the greatest riches in life are not measured in money, but in love and family. They were the best parents anyone could ask for, and they will be deeply missed." But even in death, Wesley and Teresa's love story lived on. It was told and retold to each new generation, becoming a cherished part of family history. The ranch they had built continued for decades, eventually expanding beyond what even Wesley had dreamed possible. Ruth's dress shop became a legacy business, passed down to her daughters. Thomas's descendants became educators and community leaders, carrying on his love of learning. and on quiet evenings, when the wind whispered through the Wyoming hills, some family members swore they could feel the presence of Wesley and Teresa, still watching over the land they had loved and the family they had created. The guest room where Teresa had first slept as Wesley's charge and later shared as his wife became a place of honor in the family home, kept much as it had been, a reminder of where their story had truly begun. The porch swing where they had sat for so many years remained on the front porch, maintained carefully by each successive generation. Young couples in the family would sit there to court, old married couples to reflect, always feeling connected to the great love story that had started it all. The Morrison Ranch became known not just for its success, but for the values upon which it was built: kindness to strangers, hard work, integrity, family, and above all, love. These were the principles Wesley and Teresa had lived by, and they became the foundation upon which generations built their lives. And so the story that had begun with a desperate woman seeking shelter in a stable, and a kind-hearted rancher who saw not a burden but a fellow human being in need, became a legacy that outlasted both of them. It became a testament to the power of compassion, the strength of partnership, and the transformative nature of love. In the end, Wesley Morrison had given Teresa Harper much more than just a guest room on that cold morning so long ago. He had given her hope, safety, love, and a future. And she, in turn, had given him purpose, partnership, joy, and a family. Together, they had created something beautiful and enduring, a love story for the ages, set against the wild and wonderful backdrop of the Wyoming frontier. Their story proved that sometimes the greatest adventures begin with the smallest acts of kindness, that love can bloom in the most unexpected places, and that two broken people can come together to create something whole and beautiful. From a woman sleeping in the stables to a rancher willing to open his home and heart, their journey together had been everything a great love story should be, filled with challenges overcome, joy celebrated, and a love that lasted not just a lifetime but beyond. The Morrison family continued to thrive, generation after generation, always remembering the couple who had started it all. And in a very real sense, Wesley and Teresa did live forever, not just in memory but in the legacy of love, kindness, and family they had created. Their story had come full circle, from desperate beginnings to a triumphant, joyful conclusion, proving that happy endings are not just the stuff of fairy tales but can be real, lasting, and beautiful. And that is how a woman who was sleeping in the stables came to receive not just the guest room but a rancher's whole heart, and how together they built a love that would echo through time, inspiring all who heard their story to believe in the power of kindness, the possibility of second chances, and the enduring strength of true love.